She was once just a girl singing in cheap bars, hoping men would throw coins at her feet. She grew up in an orphanage, sewing clothes she did not even own, and she went on to build one of the most famous fashion names in the entire world, a name still whispered with respect in every corner of the fashion industry today. This is the true story of Coco Chanel. Stay with us till the end, because the woman behind that famous name lived a life far darker, far bolder, and far stranger than most people ever realize. And if you are new here, hit subscribe, because Story Fluency brings you a new true story every week to help you learn English the natural way. Gabrielle Chanel was born in 1883 in a poorhouse in France. Her family was poor, and her early childhood was already difficult, moving from town to town as her father tried, and often failed, to sell goods at local markets. Then, when Gabrielle was only 12 years old, her mother died. Her father did not know what to do with his children. He took Gabrielle and her sisters to a Catholic orphanage, and then he simply left. He never came back for them. Gabrielle spent the next several years growing up inside that orphanage, wearing the same simple black and white uniform every single day. The nuns who ran the orphanage taught the girls how to sew, a skill that seemed, at the time, like nothing special at all. Nobody around her could have guessed that this exact skill, learned inside a cold orphanage by an abandoned child, would one day be worth millions of dollars. The orphanage itself, with its plain, simple lines and its black and white color scheme, would later shape her entire sense of style. Years later, when Gabrielle became famous for simple, elegant clothing, few people realized that her signature look had actually been born inside the walls of that orphanage, not in some fancy design school. When Gabrielle left the orphanage as a young woman, she had very few real options in life. Women from poor backgrounds, at that time in France, were mostly expected to become servants, factory workers, or seamstresses, spending their entire lives quietly stitching clothes for wealthier families who barely noticed them. Gabrielle began working exactly this way, as a seamstress, sewing and repairing clothes for other people during the day. At night, to earn a little extra money, she started singing in small local bars and cafes, performing in front of crowds of soldiers and working men who came looking for cheap entertainment after a long day. It was rough, noisy work, far from glamorous, and Gabrielle was never considered the most talented singer in the room. It was during this time that she picked up the nickname that would follow her for the rest of her life. She often performed a popular, catchy song about a girl who had lost her little dog, and the crowd began cheering and calling her Coco whenever she took the stage. The name stuck, and slowly, over time, Gabrielle Chanel almost disappeared entirely, replaced by the far more memorable name, Coco Chanel. Life as a small-time singer was not the glamorous, exciting career many young girls dreamed about. She was simply one voice among many, performing for small, rowdy crowds who mostly wanted loud entertainment, not real musical talent. But those difficult years quietly taught her something extremely valuable that she would use for the rest of her life. She learned how to perform under pressure, how to hold herself with confidence in front of a watching crowd, and how to create a bold, memorable image of herself, even during a time when she had almost no money and no real social standing at all. Coco's path toward fashion truly began through her relationships with wealthy men. At that time in France, It was almost impossible for a poor young woman to build a business entirely on her own. Society simply did not allow it. She became involved with a wealthy Frenchman named Etienne Balsan, who allowed her to live at his large country estate. There, surrounded by wealthy friends and endless leisure time, Coco began experimenting with her own personal style, wearing simple, borrowed men's clothing instead of the tight, complicated, uncomfortable dresses that fashionable women were expected to wear at that time. Later, she fell in love with a wealthy English businessman named Arthur Capel, known to everyone as Boy Capel. He believed strongly in Coco's talent and ambition, and it was Boy who provided the financial backing that allowed Coco to open her very first shop in Paris, selling simple, elegant hats. Without the money and support of these men, Coco's story likely never gets off the ground at all. But it was entirely her own talent, her own sharp instincts, and her own relentless drive that turned a small hat shop into something far, far bigger. Coco's hats stood out immediately, while other designers of the time were creating large, heavily decorated hats loaded with feathers, flowers, and fake fruit. Coco designed simple, clean hats with very little decoration at all. Wealthy women loved them instantly. Coco's simple hats felt fresh, modern, and surprisingly practical, a complete contrast to the overly complicated fashion of the era. Her small shop grew quickly, and soon Coco expanded from hats into full clothing. This was where her true revolution began. At that time, fashionable women were expected to wear extremely tight corsets, heavy fabrics, and long, restrictive skirts that made it almost impossible to move freely or breathe comfortably. Coco had a radically different idea. She believed clothing should be comfortable. She believed women should be able to move, breathe, and live actively in their own clothes. She began designing simple jersey fabric dresses, a material that had, until then, mostly been used only for men's underwear, never considered fashionable or elegant for women at all. Coco took this cheap, stretchy, comfortable fabric and turned it into high fashion. Wealthy women, for the first time in generations, began wearing clothes that actually let them move freely. In the 1920s, Coco introduced what would eventually become one of the most iconic pieces of clothing in the entire history of fashion, the little black dress. At that time, black was mostly associated with mourning, a heavy color worn specifically for funerals and periods of grief, never considered appropriate or attractive for a stylish evening out. Wearing black to a party, in most fashionable circles, would have seemed almost inappropriate, even slightly disturbing to some observers. Coco completely rejected that old idea. She designed a simple, elegant black dress, easy to wear, easy to dress up with jewelry or dress down for daytime. Suitable for almost any occasion a modern woman might find herself in. A major American fashion magazine featured her design, comparing it to a Ford car, simple, practical, and available to almost everyone, not just the extremely wealthy. Almost overnight, the little black dress became a powerful symbol of modern elegance and effortless simplicity. Even today, nearly 100 years later, the little black dress remains a permanent staple in almost every woman's wardrobe around the entire world. A single piece of clothing that has never truly gone out of style, no matter how fashion trends have changed around it. Coco was not only interested in clothing. In 1921, she introduced something entirely new to the world of fashion and beauty, her own signature perfume, called simply Chanel No. 5. At the time, most perfumes on the market were made using a single, dominant floral scent, something relatively simple like pure rose or pure jasmine, designed to smell exactly like one particular flower. Coco wanted something completely different, something that had never truly existed before. She worked closely with a skilled French perfumer named Ernest Beau to create a complex blend of many different scents combined together, using both natural flowers and, for the first time in perfume history, certain synthetic ingredients as well. The result smelled rich, layered, and entirely unlike anything else available at the time. She chose the simple name No. 5 because it was literally the fifth sample presented to her during testing, and she genuinely liked the clean, modern simplicity of a plain number instead of some flowery, overly romantic name that other perfumes typically used. Chanel No. 5 became an enormous, immediate success, and it remains, even today, more than 100 years later, one of the best-selling and most recognized perfumes in the entire world. Coco had proven, once again, through an entirely different product, that her sharp instincts for simple, bold, modern design worked far beyond just clothing alone. Coco Chanel's story, however, was not simply one of steady success. During the Second World War, when Nazi Germany occupied France, Coco made choices that would permanently damage her reputation. She began a personal relationship with a German officer named Hans Gunther von Dinklage, a man who was later revealed to have connections to Nazi intelligence operations. Living in a hotel controlled by German forces during the occupation of Paris, Coco's association with the enemy during wartime shocked and angered many people across France. After the war ended, Coco was actually questioned by French authorities about her wartime activities and her relationship with German officers. She avoided serious punishment, in part due to powerful personal connections, but the damage to her public image had already been done. Many French citizens viewed her, at least for a time, as a traitor to her own country during its darkest years. Coco chose to leave France for several years following the war, living quietly in Switzerland, largely out of the public eye, as her once glowing reputation remained deeply damaged back home. For almost 15 years, Coco Chanel stayed largely away from the fashion world she had once dominated so completely. Fashion moved on without her. New designers rose to fame, creating entirely new styles that pushed Coco's old innovations further into the past. Then, in 1954, at the age of 70, Coco Chanel decided to do something almost nobody expected. She announced a dramatic comeback, launching an entirely new fashion collection after so many years away from the spotlight. At first, the reaction was harsh. Many French critics mocked her return, believing her old-fashioned ideas were completely out of touch with modern fashion. But something surprising happened. American audiences, and eventually European audiences too, fell in love with her new designs, particularly her now famous tweed suits. Simple, elegant, and instantly recognizable. Within just a few years, Coco Chanel was back on top, more respected and more influential than ever before. At an age when most people are long retired, Coco proved that a true comeback was still entirely possible. Coco Chanel continued working, actively designing new collections, right up until the very end of her life. In January of 1971, she died in her apartment at the Hotel Ritz in Paris, the very same hotel where she had lived for over 30 years. She was 87 years old. She left behind an empire that still exists powerfully today. More than 50 years after her death, the Chanel brand remains one of the most valuable and respected fashion houses in the entire world, continuing to sell clothing, handbags, and perfume, including the very same Chanel No. 5 she created back in 1921. From an abandoned child in a poor French orphanage, taught to sew by strict nuns, to one of the most powerful and influential names in the history of fashion, Coco Chanel's rise remains one of the most remarkable transformations in modern history. Coco Chanel began her life with absolutely nothing. No wealthy family, no formal education, no real advantages of any kind. She was abandoned as a child, forced to grow up inside an orphanage, taught a simple skill that nobody around her believed would ever lead to anything important. Yet she took that one simple skill, sewing, and combined it with her own boldness, her own sharp instincts, and her own refusal to follow the old rules simply because everyone else did. And she built an empire that has now lasted for over a century. Her life was not perfect. She made serious mistakes, including choices during the war that permanently damaged her reputation. But her story still reminds us of something powerful. Even the coldest, hardest beginning does not have to decide how your entire story ends. Sometimes, the very things that hurt us the most, our hardship, our loneliness, our limits, quietly shape the exact skills we will later need to build something the whole world remembers. If this story moved you today, please like this video, subscribe to Story Fluency for more true stories that help you learn English naturally, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that it is never too late for a real comeback. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next story.